The man they called Qasim had 3 names. The first was the one his mother gave him at birth, whispered into the soft shell of his ear on a riverbank in the Songhai Empire, a name meaning one who is divided fairly. For she had borne twins before him, both stillborn, and she believed the gods owed her something. That name lived only in his memory now, polished smooth like a stone, turned over and over in a worried hand. The second name was what the slavers called him when they branded him and put him in chains at the age of 17. A number, scratched in chalk on a wooden board hung around his neck, as though he were a jar of grain being inventoried in a merchant's warehouse. He endured that name for 6 weeks, through the crossing of 3 rivers and a mountain pass, and then he was sold in a market in the city of Karthak to a merchant named Dovan Hess, who gave him the third name, Qasim. It means nothing, the merchant told his wife Lenara when she asked. I just liked the sound of it. Qasim, standing nearby as he filled water from a cistern, heard this and filed it away. He was already learning in those first weeks what would become the most finely honed skill of his life, the art of being invisible while present, of listening while appearing not to, of understanding more than anyone suspected he could. Dovan Hess was not a cruel man in the way that cruelty is usually imagined. He did not beat his slaves often, and when he did, he seemed vaguely embarrassed by it afterward, drinking more wine than usual and speaking loudly at dinner about the importance of order in a household. He was a man of commerce, of ledgers and contracts, and the careful weighing of things, and he treated his 4 slaves with a businesslike detachment that was, in its own way, more suffocating than any chain. You were not a person to Dovan Hess. You were an asset, and assets were maintained, not loved. There were 3 other enslaved people in the household when Qasim arrived, an old woman called Pira, who cooked and cleaned and had been with the family so long she had become part of the house's architecture. A young man from the eastern provinces called Set, who tended the horses and garden, and a woman named Maret, perhaps 30 years old, who served as Lenara's personal attendant and seemed to have built careful peace for herself in that role by becoming indispensable and emotionally invisible. Qasim observed them all. He observed everything. In the first month, he made himself useful in every minor way he could. He brought water without being asked. He swept the front steps each morning before anyone was awake to notice that they were dirty. When a merchant came to conduct business with Dovan and the old man's sandal strap broke in the courtyard, Qasim was at his side in seconds with the length of cord, kneeling to repair it before the merchant had even finished expressing his frustration. He learned the names of Dovan's business, associates, their preferences, the deals they had made, and the deals that had gone sour. He learned which guests Lenara liked, and which ones she merely tolerated. And when she merely tolerated them, he filled their wine cups slightly less generously, and refilled them slightly less often. Not enough for anyone to notice, just enough to hasten the end of visits she did not want. He was never thanked for any of this. Invisibility, he understood, was its own reward. Qasim is a good one, he heard Dovan tell a visiting cousin one afternoon, while Qasim stood just outside the door, holding a tray of figs, waiting to be needed. Does what he's told, doesn't complain, doesn't cause trouble. I should have bought his type years ago. Qasim walked in with the figs, arranged them perfectly on the table, and withdrew without a word. Inside himself, he noted the word type and held it up to examine it. It told him everything he needed to know about where he stood in Do Van Hesse's mind. Not a man, a category. He decided he would make that category serve him. By the end of his first year, Kasim had mastered the dialect of the city, the accounting system Dovan used in his business, the rough geography of the trade routes along which Dovan's goods moved, and the personal ambitions of every significant merchant family in the district. He had also catalogued, with quiet precision, every one of Dovan's weaknesses. Chief among them was vanity. Not the vanity of appearance. Dovan was a plain man who dressed plainly. But the vanity of competence. He needed, above all things, to be the most capable person in any room. He needed his judgments to be correct. He needed the world to confirm, daily, that he had made good decisions. Kasim began to engineer those confirmations. When Dovan was weighing a contract with a cloth merchant named Revar, who had been cutting the quality of his fabric while keeping prices steady, Kasim arranged to be in the room during a preliminary meeting, refilling water cups. As the conversation turned toward the quality of Revar's latest shipment, Kasim moved slightly too close to the sample fabric on the table and allowed his sleeve to brush against it. Then he stopped, looked down, ran 2 fingers along the weave, and said nothing. Just set his jaw in an expression of mild concern before stepping back to his place by the wall. Later, after Revar had left, Dovan called him over. "You touched the fabric. I apologize, master. I should not have." "What were you thinking? You looked concerned." "I noticed the weave was loose, master. The threads will separate in 2 or 3 washings. I have seen fabric made this way before. It is not worth what Revar is asking." He paused. "But I may be mistaken. I am not a cloth merchant." Dovan sat with this for a long moment. He sent the fabric to a textile appraiser the next day, who confirmed everything Kasim had said. He did not complete the contract with Revar. 3 months later, Revar's business collapsed under accusations of systematic fraud. Dovan began to consult Kasim informally after that. Not directly, never as an equal, never as someone whose opinion was being sought. It was always framed as an instruction. "You will accompany me to the Fedis warehouse tomorrow. You will stand by during my meeting with the harbor authorities." But Kasim understood that the real message was, "I want your eyes in that room." Dovan would never say he trusted Kasim's judgment, because that would require acknowledging that Kasim had judgment. Instead, he trusted Kasim's presence, the way you might trust a sensitive instrument you didn't fully understand. Kasim cultivated this carefully. He never volunteered information unless asked in some fashion, direct or indirect. He never corrected Dovan openly. If Dovan made a business decision that Kasim believed was flawed, he would find a way to quietly place in the room, through a document left on a table, through a casual comment to another servant who would relay it, through a question asked by Lenara at dinner that Kasim had carefully suggested to her during the morning routine. The information that might shift Dovan's thinking. He left the conclusions for Dovan to reach himself. He gave Dovan the gift of always being right, and in exchange, without ever asking, without ever demanding, Kasim made himself necessary. Pira watched all of this with eyes that had seen decades of men and their patterns. "You are building something," she said one evening when they were alone in the kitchen after the household had gone to sleep. I'm doing my work, Qasim replied. She stirred a pot without looking at him. When I was your age, I thought the same thing. Building. Then I blinked and I was old, and I had built nothing but a reputation for good soup. I am not building a reputation, Qasim said. She looked at him then. No, she said. You are not. She never spoke of it again, but from that evening onward, she helped him in small ways, without being asked and without acknowledgement, leaving the right doors unlocked, ensuring he was assigned to duties that placed him where he needed to be. Whether from solidarity or from some private calculation of her own, he could not tell. He was grateful either way and said nothing. In the second year, Qasim learned that Dovan Hess had a political problem. The city of Karthak was governed by a council of 12 merchant families, and for the past decade, one of those families, the Vaughan, had been consolidating power in ways that frightened the smaller houses. Dovan was not a small house, but he was not aligned with the Vaughan, and this made him vulnerable. There were contracts he could not win, harbor fees that seemed to apply only to his shipments, inspections of his warehouses that happened with suspicious frequency. Qasim had been mapping this situation for months before Dovan began to fully perceive it. He had also quietly been mapping the Vaughan's vulnerabilities. It was a habit by now, the mapping. He could not help it. His mind moved through a social landscape the way a river moves through a valley, finding the lowest ground, following the natural path, carving channels where the stone was softest. The Vaughan's weakness was a man named Kalek, the youngest and most ambitious of the family's 3 brothers. Kalek Vaughan wanted to be more than a merchant. He wanted to be a politician, a man of civic consequence, and he had been conducting a secret correspondence for several years with a reform faction in the capital that sought to restructure the council system in ways that would benefit the smaller trading towns at Karthak's expense, and would benefit Kalek personally by elevating him into a national political role, making the entire Vaughan family enterprise his to inherit by default. Qasim knew this because he had read the letters. This required explanation. For 18 months, Qasim had been the person in the household responsible for receiving deliveries. It was a minor duty beneath the notice of anyone significant, which was precisely why he had maneuvered Seth out of it and himself into it, by the simple expedient of ensuring that several of Seth's deliveries were delayed or misdirected, creating a minor pattern of unreliability that led Dovan, on his own initiative, to reassign the task. The courier network in Karthak ran through 3 main warehouses, and the couriers knew the slaves of the major households almost as well as they knew their employers. After a few months of friendly reliability, small gifts of food, and genuine interest in the couriers' lives, Qasim had built relationships that gave him access to information that passed through those warehouses. He never intercepted letters. He was too careful for that, and too patient. He simply knew when letters arrived, who sent them, and roughly what categories of business they concerned, based on the seals, the paper quality, the courier used, the time of delivery. From 100 such observations, he had assembled a picture of Kalek Vaughan's political activity as clearly as if he'd read every word, When he felt the picture was complete enough, he chose his moment. Dovan had summoned him to carry documents to the harbor authority, a routine task, and on the return journey, Kasim passed through a street where Dovan happened to be standing outside a coffee house with a business associate. This was not an accident. Kasim had known where Dovan would be at that hour. He stopped, reported the completion of his errand, and then hesitated in a way he had practiced. "Is there something else?" Dovan asked, with the faint irritation of a man whose time is being wasted. "There is something I have been uncertain whether to mention, Master. I did not want to speak of things outside my understanding." "Speak then." "The courier Menk, who handles the road to the capital. I have noticed that he delivers to the Vaughan household on a weekly schedule, and the letters he carries use the private seal of the Reform Bureau in Altavar. I may be wrong about what this means." He left it there. He walked away with his documents and did not look back. 3 weeks later, the Reform faction's correspondence was exposed. By whom and through what channels, Kasim was never told, nor did he ask. Khalek Vaughan was summoned before the full council to explain his political activities. The Vaughan family's grip on the council loosened considerably over the following months. Dovan's warehouse inspections ceased, his harbor fees normalized, and Kasim, who had given a single ambiguous comment about a courier's schedule and done nothing else, was beyond reproach. In the 3rd year, Marit came to him. She found him one evening in the courtyard, where he liked to sit after his duties were done, in the blue hour before full dark, when the household was quiet and the air smelled of dust and cooling stone. "I know what you are doing," she said, sitting across from him without asking permission, which told him immediately that she was not asking for his reassurance or his denial. "Then you know more than most," he said. "I know you are building a path out." She said it flatly, as a statement of observed fact. "I have been watching you for 3 years. You are collecting leverage and spending none of it, which means you are saving it for something large, something final." He looked at her for a long moment. "Why are you telling me you know?" "Because I want to know if there is room for 2 on this path." He had underestimated her. He recognized this with a feeling that was equal parts embarrassment and respect. He had seen her as Lenara's attendant, had categorized her as having made a different bargain. The bargain of the openly indispensable, the one who is so intimately woven into a mistress's life that her status becomes a strange, half-acknowledged dignity. He had not seen that her position gave her access to information as powerful as anything he possessed, and that she had been just as deliberately accumulating it. They sat in the courtyard for 2 hours that evening, speaking quietly, and what they built in that conversation was not a plan, but a foundation, a mutual understanding that they were the 2 sharpest minds in the household of Dovan Hess, that they had both independently been working toward the same end, and that they were stronger together than apart. Marit knew things about Lenara that Kasim had only guessed at. Among them, that Lenara had, before her marriage, been promised to another man, a minor lord from a northern province, and that the dissolution of that arrangement had never been fully documented. The northern lord, now elderly and politically irrelevant, was still technically owed a settlement that Lenara's family had never paid. It was a minor, ancient matter, forgotten by everyone involved, except that the Northern Lord had recently died, and his estate was being administered by a young and aggressive nephew who had been reviewing the family's old financial claims. Lenara did not know this. Dovin did not know this. But Maret, who had been present when Lenara received a letter from a cousin in the north, and who had seen Lenara's face go pale before she threw the letter into the kitchen fire, knew it. She had reconstructed the contents from what she'd glimpsed before it burned, and from the 17 subsequent hours of Lenara's agitated, overmanaged behavior. "She has not told Dovin," Maret said. "She is afraid of how he will receive it." "Yes, and whoever tells him first controls the shape of his understanding." They looked at each other. "Not yet," Qasim said. "We hold it." "I know," Maret said. "I only wanted you to know I have it." After that night, they coordinated. Not obviously, not in ways that would be visible to any observer. They rarely spoke directly. They developed a system of small signals. The placement of an object, the way a task was described, a particular phrase worked into routine conversation that allowed them to communicate about the information they were jointly managing without ever appearing to communicate at all. It was, Qasim thought sometimes, the most fully equal relationship he had known since his mother's household. The irony of finding it here was not lost on him.